In Section 2 of Module 2, we'll be reviewing rent subsidy in more detail. The Rental Assistance Program must have a rent standard that sets the limit for housing costs for each unit size, from 1-bedroom to 6-bedroom units. The rent standard helps ensure that selected units are modest rather than luxury housing. It includes both rent and utilities. What is not included is telephone, internet, and cable. When determining whether a particular unit is within the rent standard, the project sponsor needs to know the amount of several costs: rent being requested by the landlord, basic utilities included in the rent to the landlord, and basic utilities to be paid separately in addition to the rent paid to the landlord. One of the responsibilities of program staff is to ensure that the rents being charged for the assisted units are reasonable. Reasonableness is tested in 2 ways and must be documented by program staff. One of the ways that it is tested is that rent charged for the unit must be reasonable in relation to rents currently being charged for comparable units in the private unassisted market. Secondly, rent charged cannot be higher than rents currently being charged by the owner, also known as the landlord, for comparable unassisted units. The purpose of the requirement is to ensure that no property owner artificially inflates assisted units over comparable unassisted units. At no time should the rent to the owner exceed the reasonable rental amount. Each program should have established policies on how rent reasonableness will be determined and documented. Program staff must document the decision-making process and the decision in the tenant's file. Determining rent reasonableness can be done in one of 2 ways. First, your agency can use a market study conducted by the local public housing agency, also known as PHA, or other entity. In some cases, HOPWA grantees and project sponsors have worked in partnership with their local public housing agency to gain access to rent reasonableness assessments. Secondly, agents can review comparable units. A grantee or project sponsor may also choose to conduct their own review of comparable units. This is usually the best option for smaller programs or for programs that serve a large or very geographic region that may be different than any one PHA. Here, we just want to acknowledge the importance for all grantees to review their rent standards annually against the new fair market rent schedule. This will allow grantees to make sure that rent standards are at least 90% of the new fair market rent. To determine the rent standard, we must examine the following 4 factors. First, availability of affordable units. This may be demonstrated by reasonableness data, vacancy rates, and supply or location of housing. If eligible households are having trouble finding affordable housing within the rent standard, the rent standards for the area may be too low. We have to look at the size and quality of housing. The size and quality of housing may be limited due to the rent standards. The grantee may track data collected during the HOPWA Habitability Standards Review to determine if certain trends are occurring. For example, lack of 1-bedroom units or units with utilities. We must also examine the time needed to locate housing or the voucher expires without leasing. If eligible households are unable to find housing within 90 days of entering the program or the time period for finding housing expires, the rent standard may be too low for the area. We also have to examine large number of turnovers. If there's a high rate of turnover of eligible households receiving housing rental assistance, the rent standard may be too low to allow eligible households to access neighborhoods with amenities necessary for the family. For example, access to neighborhoods with good public transportation, schools, work, or other community amenities may be limited based on the rent standard used. Grantees generally use the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's published fair market rents as a guidance setting the rent standard. This document is updated annually and provides rental information for metropolitan statistical areas, also known as MSAs, and our counties for programs targeting areas outside of MSAs. FMRs are provided based on the bedroom size of the units. For example, 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom units. However, another option for grantees is to use the Local Housing Choice Voucher Payment Standard. This concludes Section 2 of Module 2. We now ask that you do the activity below to reinforce some of the material we have just reviewed before proceeding to Section 3.